Hudson and Senator Lucero for having us back once again in St. Michael. This is going to be a great event talking about all of the chaos that ensued this session, particularly in the last week, as well as all of the policies that affect your everyday lives and affects who we are as Minnesotans. So I would like to welcome you to Americans for Prosperity presents One Expensive Minnesota. As we know, Governor Tim Walz likes to talk about how we're one Minnesota, and the policy that he has is the One Minnesota budget. But as we know, it has become one expensive Minnesota. Just within the $10 billion in new taxes alone, wasting the $17.5 billion surplus. So first off, I want to introduce myself. My name is Joshua Solano. I'm the Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity here in Minnesota. I'm sure you've met members of my staff here. We're all from the state. We all live here. I lived in the Egan-Apple Valley area my whole life, except for the time when I was in the Marine Corps. I came back because I wanted to fight the state that I grew up in. I'm going to open up as people come in with some of the things about who we are as an organization and why we feel it's so important to come out into districts and into the communities to have our policy champions like Representative Hudson and Senator Lucero be able to speak to you on the things that are happening. So Americans for Prosperity is one of the largest grassroots organizations in the country. Currently, we have 37 chapters nationwide. We're working on a 50-state strategy. And what we do is we support policy champions. So when it comes to being able to work anything from, and I'll come to this slide here. That's our team. Our director is Jake Coleman. He's our state director. I'm the deputy director. We have Raina Lee, our legislative and coalitions director, and Maria Voigt, our grassroots engagement director, and Amos Webskowski, our other grassroots engagement directors. You may have gotten text messages or emails from them telling you to RSVP or ask to come to this event. These are the issues that we focus on as an organization. So we are a 501c4 nonprofit, so we do not get into elections works, we do not get into campaigning. We are part of a large community that gets involved in those actions, but we are primarily policy focused. So the things that we focus on are constitutionally limited government, the economy, education, foreign policy, the future of work in America, healthcare, and safe and strong communities. And I'm happy to announce we also have a POV on immigration and public safety as well, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Now, this is one of our largest campaigns this year, Bidenomics. So the funny thing about Bidenomics is that the president in the White House thought that the economy was doing so well last year, he decided to name it after himself. As we quickly found, he dropped that word, and they no longer use that word in his press conferences. But the funny thing about that is for some reason, they decided not to buy the URL, so we bought it for them. So, if you go to Bidenomics.com, you can see the truth. You can see the truth about what the Biden economy has done and what the executive actions and the executive orders that they have undertaken that has askewed the economy. So, as we see today, it costs $11,434 just to maintain your quality of life from before this president took office. And I don't know about you, but wages aren't getting any better. Housing and the rent market is not getting any better. The energy crisis certainly isn't getting any better. We also have another website, Secure Border, Secure America. So Americans for Prosperity, we work with an expert that we help travel all across the country to bring the truth about the border to communities. We work with the former Border Police Chief, Chief Clem, and I would love to have him here in Minnesota one day. Currently, he's on tour in around other Americans for Prosperity chapters in the state. But if you go to this website, you can see that the stunt the Biden administration did 3 weeks ago was just that. It was just a stunt. It does nothing to help this country. It does nothing to help the border crisis that we have. This is another one of our main focuses in healthcare. So the DFL and the Democrats at large across the country love to talk about universal healthcare or single-payer healthcare. Here in Minnesota, we have it Minnesota Care or Medicaid expansion. So if you go to personaloption.com, you can find out the issues and the bills that we are helping focus. We understand that this is largely a federal issue, but there are things that we can do on the state level to prepare for when
when the federal government and Congress is able to make that healthcare reform to further the personal option, like protecting direct primary care, to be able to choose your doctor, to be able to subscribe basically to them, to have house calls again, instead of having to go have a blood work or thyroid test that costs $124 because you have to go through insurance, it's not covered by your deductible. But with direct primary care, you can simply go to your doctor and have it done in the lab right there for as little as $4. So those are the things that we like to focus on when it comes to personal option, because we know that the public option is not the answer for the state of Minnesota, which we proudly defeated twice. Once in 2023 and 2024, our champions in the Senate made sure that that was possible. This is, I'll finish up here quickly, but prosperity is possible. So we know that a lot of organizations like to talk about what's bad about the country or bad about the state. We like to ensure that there is hope. There are things that we can do. We know that prosperity is possible. We know that we can reignite the American dream. So, you can also go to this website and you can see some of our policies when it comes to energy reform, spending reform, labor reform, because we know that it's not the end. And I know from the news, from social media, you can doom scroll for hours. But there are policy champions like Representative Hudson and Senator Lucero and organizations like AFP that fight for good, that fight for the solutions to problems. Bottom-up solutions is what we do as an organization, not top-down mandates like the DFL majority has given us in the last 2 years. This is, I believe, one of our last slides, or we might have two more, but One Expensive Minnesota. Our legislative director, Rayanna Lee, she built this calculator from scratch. It took her 9 months. So if you want to know how many new taxes that the governor and the DFL majority has imposed upon us in the last 2 years, I would encourage you all to go to oneexpensiveminnesota.com or mn.com and fill it out. We don't take any of your information. We don't take any of your data. We want you to see how much more in new taxes that they are charging you. I did it myself, and I'm paying $5,723 extra per year. And I work for a nonprofit. So that's a lot. Get involved, whether it's with AFP, whether it's with working with policy champions directly and helping them. Supporting policy champions is what we can do to move the Overton window in our communities. To be able to start with the grassroots is to start somewhere, right? We're not going to change everything overnight, but we can when you're supporting individuals like them or other organizations that you align with you. So if you would like to know more about us or get involved, you can reach out to my staffers at the front that helped you check in. We have some more events coming up. So these are actually going to be fun. We're hosting a presidential debate watch party with the Young Republicans of Minnesota in Chaska. I'm looking forward to that debate. Who is looking forward to that debate? I know I am. We're hosting a Bidenomics ice cream, Representative Myers. Who would have thought? We're going to see how much it costs extra this time around to have an event with the president's favorite pastime, eating chocolate chip ice cream and talking about the economy, talking about policies that we can do. It's the little luxuries in life that have now, or it's the little things that have now become luxuries in life, right? We are planning a gas station rollback event. That is to be announced. We're keeping that kind of as it rolls out, but we're going to show somewhere in the state, you'll have to look out for the announcement, we're going to be rolling back the clock to $1.68 from when before Joe Biden was president on gas. So be on the lookout for us in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be a surprise because we're only going to be able to service the first 100 vehicles. But we want to be able to show how good it is and how much Minnesotans miss those gas prices. And of course, another brewery blowout towards October. We have days of action. We door knock a lot as a C4 organization on policy because we believe that we need to educate the public. We need to be out there. So currently, AFP Minnesota we are at 9,500 doors a week. We believe that we're one of the only organizations that can do this, right? And we work hard. We work 7 days a week. We're trying to get to 10,000 doors a week, and then 12,000 and 15,000, because none of this can be possible without educating the public about the policies that were passed in the last 2 years. Right now, we're up to 122,000 doors just this year. And that's a huge accomplishment. I believe that was the end of my... I'm going to scroll all the way back, because if I exit it, it will we'll go back to the computer screen. So I apologize if you just bear with me for one moment. There we go. Thank you all for coming again. I am going to welcome Representative Walter Hudson and Senator Eric Lucero. We will begin with their good to see you. We'll begin with their opening remarks, and then they're going to talk about what happened this session. We're going to talk about policies that have happened this session, and then if we have time at the end, we will have about 20 minutes of Q&A. Please remember that we're a C4 nonprofit. We cannot talk about elections. We cannot talk about campaigning and things like that, and I know that they will happily keep us on track with the bad policy this year. Thank you again.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. Is it on? Can you hear it up there?
Yes.
It is? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for coming out. I am Eric Lucero, and it is a privilege and honor to serve in the capacity as senator for this great community. I know there are probably people here from outside the community. I see many familiar faces from within the community. There we go. Is that better?
No, it's
better. Okay. So it was not working before? Okay. You can hear me, but not because of the mic. Well, good morning. What I was saying was thank you for coming out. I am Eric Lucero. I'm the senator for this great community. So whether you're from this area or from outside the area or whether you're streaming online, there are important conversations taking place. So for those who may not be familiar, just brief background. I am presently senator. I'm in my first term as senator, halfway through my 4-year term. Prior to this, I was in the Minnesota House for 4 terms for 8 years. So I've been in office with that privilege of serving and standing for the values and priorities of this community for 10 years. The committees I serve on right now in the Senate are the Energy Committee, the Education Finance Committee, and the Housing Committee. So, brief opening remarks. This right here weighs 22 pounds. It stands approximately 6.5 inches high. This is over 1,400 pages. This was the final super omnibus bill that was passed in the last seconds of the legislative session just prior to the constitutional mandated adjournment of midnight, and it comprises of multiple subjects. So by way of background, there are many committees, as I mentioned, 3 of them that I have the privilege of serving on. There are more committees: Transportation Committee, Judiciary Committee, Health and Human Services Committee, the Agriculture Committee, and there's more. Each of these committees, in the regular order of a legislative session, will take topics that are somewhat related or tangentially related to the jurisdiction of that committee, and they will assemble an omnibus bill. Each individual committee will assemble a series of smaller bills into an omnibus bill, and they will pass. That in and of itself is multiple subject by definition, and it is a very gray area, and omnibus bills are something I know myself, Representative Hudson, and many others do not support.
No way.
But that's what it is. That's what an omnibus bill is, for those who don't know. Now, if you take those multiple omnibus bills, which in and of themselves contain multiple subjects, and then you combine them all together. So take the Transportation Omnibus Bill, take the Health and Human Services Omnibus Bill, take the Agriculture Omnibus Bill, take these other omnibus bills. If you combine them, you're certainly now well beyond any rational, reasonable person's idea of a constitutional bill. Well, that's what this is. It contains multiple omnibus bills. This contains many different subjects, and the Minnesota Constitution has a single subject clause that prohibits bills of multiple subjects. This is a clear violation of that.
Oh, wow.
The reason this passed is because the majority made the decision that they would rather push their agenda through rather than have an open, transparent, and accountable government. There is nothing in here that empowers individuals, families, or businesses. There's nothing in here that allows for the opportunity to pursue happiness. Nothing in here that works towards prosperity. And I'm very thankful for Americans for Prosperity, because that is the goal. We're all striving for prosperity for ourselves,
Yes.
our family members, whoever it might be.
Yes,
And prosperity is achieved by empowering individuals.
that's right.
This right here is the antithesis of empowering individuals. It is the antithesis of accountability. It is the antithesis of transparency. This right here is the product of single-party governance in Minnesota. This must come to an end.
Amen.
This harms Minnesota. It is getting more expensive to live in this state. It is getting more expensive to do business in this state. It is becoming more distant to achieving prosperity. We're seeing housing costs explode. We're seeing the cost of childcare explode. We're seeing the cost of gas and groceries explode. Everything is becoming more expensive in Minnesota, crippling Minnesotans. Just this week, and I'll close with this sentence in my opening remarks. Earlier this week, I think it was Monday, I had a constituent call me who lives in Otsego, and she has her daughter and her son-in-law live in Hanover. So I have the privilege of serving Otsego, which is where she lives, and her daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandchildren live in Hanover. She called me up and she said, Eric, my daughter and son-in-law are on the verge of having to move to South Dakota. I'm about to lose my 2 beautiful grandchildren because they're going to move to South Dakota. And when she said by lose, obviously become more distant in terms of having the ability to interact on a daily basis. The reason she said they're having to do this, they're being forced out of their home due to rising taxes and the cost of living in Minnesota. She was on the verge of tears of what's happening. And her question to me was, Eric, what can we do about it? Unfortunately, there is no immediate solution. She was pouring out her heart to me, and I could feel her broken heart. Because as grandparents, whether it be parents, grandparents, we want our family to be close if possible.
Yes, yes.
We all want the ability to pursue happiness and chase prosperity and obtain prosperity. But when we're being taxed out of our homes, taxed out of our businesses, and it's becoming a challenge, a financial challenge, to live in this state,
Yes.
this is the reason it needs to change. This is the reason why we need to end one-party control in Minnesota. I appreciate, again, you coming out. I'll pass it on to Rep. Hudson to give some opening remarks, and then we're here to answer any questions or try to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Senator Lucero. And thank you, folks, for coming here today. It's quite something from this view, from this perspective, to look out at folks sitting in a movie theater with their popcorn, here to listen to us talk about policy in the state of Minnesota. I hope it's entertaining for you, but I also hope that it's edifying and it's educational, and we walk out of here feeling like we're better off than when we walked in because we know what it is that we need to go do in order to make Minnesota a better place to live. Everything that Senator Lucero said, 100% on point. The theme that I want to roll with here today is that there's a huge difference between how issues and policies and politics are talked about and the reality of what's actually happening on the ground. So again, we point to this, the 1,400-page monstrosity. What is it that we have heard since 2020 is one of the top concerns of American voters? Threats to democracy.
You need to hold your mic closer.
Thank you.
There you go.
Threats to democracy, they tell us. Threats to democracy. Now, they're never very clear about what they mean. What is it that is a threat to democracy? What's the imminent threat, the clear and present threat that needs to be addressed? I have an example. Okay? That process that Senator Lucero talked about, we get sworn into office, we get sorted into these committees. The committees are supposed to discuss policy proposals, bills that are meant to address different jurisdictions, public safety, education, transportation. That process is designed to be democratic. It's designed so that when somebody comes with their wild idea of the direction we ought to go, it gives you and other folks who have a stake in that policy the opportunity to come down to the Capitol and be heard and discuss it and to read it and to consider it and to give your feedback, to be represented. That's what we're ostensibly elected to do, right? The way this thing went down at the end, literally nobody could read what was in this bill.
Wow.
When this bill was passed, it was physically impossible to know what was in it because you couldn't access it online and there was no physical copy. This is, by definition, tyrannical.
Against the law. Oh, yeah.
You cannot pretend to be champions of democracy when this is the process that you're utilizing, where nobody even knows what they're voting on and they don't care. They just vote yes anyway because they've been told that's what they're going to do, that's what they're supposed to do, that's what we do here. We vote yes when we're told to vote yes. That's the reality of what's going on the ground here in the state of Minnesota. You have been shut out. And it wasn't a decision that was made on the last couple of days of session. It was a decision that was made on day one, the day after the election in 2022. They decided, we've got the votes, that's it. Whatever we want, we're going to get. At the exclusion of literally everyone. And we were told on multiple occasions throughout the session, both years, when we were on the few times we did actually have discussions about what it is that we're doing, the direction that we're going in this state, we were often told on the House floor, well, that was decided by fill-in-the-blank constituency group. When we would ask somebody to yield to a question, can you tell us why this bill is written this way? Why the concerns about it are being ignored? Why, when similar proposals have made their way through the process in the past, you agreed to this, that, and the other thing, and this year you're not? Why? And the answer was always, this is what our people want. This is what our constituent group said they must have. In other words, the decision was already made outside this chamber. It was already made outside the legislature. It was already made outside of public view, and you're just here to rubber stamp it. Stop asking questions. And they were very flagrant and obvious and arrogant in the deployment of this attitude. You want to talk about threats to democracy? That's a threat to democracy. And we keep talking about, one-party rule, the trifecta. I don't think it's a trifecta per se. That's the problem. I don't think it's the fact that one party is in control of everything. That's the problem. I think it's which type of people are in control.
Right. Yes.
And the policies that they're implementing and the way that they're implementing them. Because it's a question of character. If you actually believed the things that you said, if you actually cared about democratic processes, if you were actually interested in hearing from the folks who are going to be impacted by the policies that you're proposing, it wouldn't matter what name is slapped on the door of who's in charge. Because you'd be doing the work to go through the process to represent the people. The problems that we have, and there are many that have already been alluded to, but the big ones really come down to this handful, as I see it. Unsustainability. Minnesota is on an unsustainable path. You can't just spend $18 billion of surplus, raise taxes by $10 billion, increase the state budget by 40%, while we're all suffering under Bidenomics, while inflation is making it impossible to live here. You can't just do all of that and expect that it's going to continue to work year over year moving ahead. It's as if there's no concern whatsoever about what life looks like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I used to be on the city council in Albertville next door. And like any city council, and if you have any familiarity with local government, you know how this works. Everything is based upon long-term comprehensive plans. What are things going to look like 30 years from now? That's the framework under which every decision is made. Not in St. Paul. You know what the timeline is in St. Paul? 2 years. Wow. Guess why? You got it. You got it. Because the only thing that matters, the purpose of being down there is to keep the sludge moving and to keep people in power. It's supposed to be to ensure you have a state for the next 50 years. That's what it's supposed to be.
Yep.
And we need to return the focus to that. Public safety is obviously an issue. Crime is an issue. We see the way that our law enforcement community has been demeaned and disparaged, and it has real material impacts that have had deadly consequences. The economy is not some abstract thing that doesn't matter. It's not an ideological plaything for you to live out your college theory fantasies, a laboratory of ideology. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about the ability to produce value, to trade value for value, to be prosperous, to build a future. That shouldn't be political. The only thing political about that should be ensuring that you have the freedom to do it. And that's it. So that's the direction that we need to head back to. I appreciate your guys' time, and we'll turn it over for Q&A.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. I think the first couple of questions, I'm gonna kind of lead 3 questions here, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So one of the things that really concerns me is how unaligned certain individuals within the state can be totally opposite of what regular everyday people believe. And their unaligned policy and their unaligned beliefs. I know that one thing that continues to concern me is the current chairship of the tax committee in the House. So I kind of want, maybe this is a question for Representative Hudson, and I think I actually have to, I'll give you this one because I think this one's about that. How is it working with Chair Aisha Gomez, and what were some of the things that you continue to see that, you know, if we continue to have this unaligned policy majority in the House, what are we looking to? Are we looking to like 20% corporate income tax? Or are we looking to like higher property taxes? What do you think we're headed towards?
Thank you for that question. So Aisha Gomez, chair of the tax committee in the House. You know, sometimes people ask me, are there any Democrats that you like? And the answer is, on a personal level, yeah, there's a handful. I have good conversations and good relationships with folks, even though we vehemently disagree about things. One of the things I deeply appreciate about Representative Aisha Gomez is her honesty. She can't help but just tell you what she thinks and what she wants to do and where she wants to go. And so it's always been interesting whenever we've had floor debates on bills where she's the chief author, such as the tax omnibus bill. When folks ask her to yield to a question, she will give you the answer. And sometimes I would say it's cloaked in advertising rhetoric. But if you listen carefully enough, and if you get her talking long enough, she'll be honest with you about what she thinks. And the fact of the matter is she believes that your money is not yours.
Oh, God.
This became extraordinarily clear early on in 2023 when we debated the full repeal of the Social Security tax, which they campaigned on in 2022. Okay. But they didn't do once they actually got full power. And she said flat out, it's not your money.
Wow.
And that there are, if you have made certain choices in your life, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I stand by it. If you've made certain choices in your life that result in you having some assets, not being destitute, basically, then you don't deserve to have a tax cut on your Social Security income. Because you see, the way you earn the right to a tax cut is by making terrible life decisions and being destitute.
Oh no.
Right? If you actually are productive, if you demonstrate virtue, if you save, if you accumulate, not that you're wildly wealthy and rich, but you've made some decent decisions, you've been a responsible human being, well then, we can tax you to no end. And this attitude was expressed again and again and again. Another example, another chair in the House, Dave Pinto, Children and Families, fascinating debate we had in that committee where Representative Natalie Zalezkar went to your dad's wisdom, right, of money doesn't grow on trees. There isn't a, forget the exact term she used, a money tree, magic money tree, that phrase, magic money tree. There's no magic money tree. And Dave Pinto says, oh yes there is. And this is it. And what he meant was the public spending policy that we were deliberating. They legitimately believe, like in the depths of their hearts, when you talk to them, they believe that government spending money creates value. That if you spend $1 today, you're going to save $7 tomorrow, and that's somehow how money is made. They believe that. And because they believe that, they fundamentally do not think there's such a thing as too many taxes. And so they'll continue to raise it.
That is just absolutely harrowing. I know being there and talking to you guys and doing our best to bring voices, helping to bring constituent voices to the Capitol, that it seemed like it was impossible to get through to people. There were a few in the House that were open to conversations on education or healthcare reform, but whenever I would walk into the Senate, it was like a wall. So I kind of was going to ask you, it's the conviction is there, clearly, right? And, it's good to be convicted, because at least you don't have to look for a snake in the grass. It's right in front of you. But in the Senate, I was having a difficult time breaking through that wall. So they have a one-seat majority, the DFL policy majority in the House. And for someone like me who just wants to focus on policy or talk about what we're hearing at the doors or what people are telling us in emails, how is it for you as working as a senator, first-term senator, with just a one-seat majority? I mean, what is the difficulties that you're finding? It shouldn't be that hard to work with them, right? So was it difficult? Was it hard? Was it easy? What were some of the dynamics with the minority and the majority in the Senate?
So as we're all aware, the Democrats have a 34-seat majority to a 33-seat minority, one seat. Well, technically right now, because one of the Democrats has resigned, there's a 33 to 33 as we speak. But for the last 2 years, it's been 34 to 33. What does that 34 to 33 mean? It means that 49%, greater than 49% of Minnesota, voted against the Democrat majority in the Senate. That means that greater than 49% of Minnesota that voted against the majority Democrats in the Senate don't have a voice in the legislation that's getting passed. So to answer the question, it was as if there was a wall made of 34 people. History didn't matter. Logic didn't matter. Rational conversation or constructive dialogue didn't seem to matter. All that mattered to this wall of 34 Democrats in the Senate was their ideology and their stakeholder groups outside of the legislature. Incredibly frustrating, because the formula for prosperity, it's not complicated to understand. The formula to allow people to pursue their happiness, the opportunity, is through empowerment. It's understanding, empowering people, individuals and families, to make decisions that are best for themselves and their families. Allowing them to do so in the sphere of transportation, in the sphere of healthcare, in the sphere of education, in the sphere of housing, in the sphere of anything. And these 34 Democrats have an ideology that they know better. And one short example. In the Housing Committee. So how many in here recognize or feel the pressure or know somebody that is dealing with the pressure of the high cost of housing? Yeah, almost every hand is up. Whether you are renting or owning. In fact, I just put an article out this week on social media, a headline, I forget which news outlet it was, that the cost of home ownership, I think it's nationwide actually, has increased by $18,000. Wow. In other words, to maintain a home. The maintenance involved. So the cost is exploded. So in the Housing Committee, they're bringing through these policy, and in one particular, or a series of bills, it was related to tenants, and it was putting greater regulation on housing providers. And I explained to this person who was the chief author on the other side, one of the 34, that you're increasing the risk, you're decreasing the ability of the housing provider to make informed decisions, and that increased risk and less visibility into the background of a prospective tenant, for example, is going to translate into a higher rent. That is logic. That's how it works. When there's more risk, the cost was going to go higher, and the cost will get passed on to the tenant. I tried to explain as succinctly and as logically as I could the reality, and it did not matter. So to answer the question, it is incredibly frustrating when dealing with a wall of 34 that it is their priority to advance their extreme ideology rather than to recognize that greater than 49% of Minnesota did not vote for them, that greater than 49% still have a voice or should have a voice and a seat at the table and be represented by the other 33 senators, but that did not matter because passing or advancing their ideology that unfortunately is harmful to Minnesota was more important than doing what is right, learning from history, and allowing, again, people to pursue their prosperity.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. Because when you think about that one seat majority, that's 80,000 people that they had more over. But we saw that it actually wasn't. It was like just a couple, maybe 1,500 votes throughout the entire state. So we saw that everyone within a non-DFL majority district, their voices did not matter. The representatives in the House, the senators that represent them as well, they don't care what those people think. They don't care what a majority or a slightly minority. I mean, we're not even talking a minority. Just like 1,500 people, their voices don't matter. So the other thing, and I think I have one more question for each of you. And I'd like to ask Representative Hudson this question because I would like to know his insights. We saw some scathing scathing reports from the Office of the Legislative Auditor within the last 2 weeks. First, we had, as Americans for Prosperity, we deal with spending and taxation that is reliable, understanding that we're not over-regulating the government, that we're not over-regulating and mandating people's lives, but you have a government that has created massive mandates, massive regulations, massive one-time spending, and rampant fraud, right? We're here to reignite the American dream. We're here to tell people that prosperity is possible, but then they take the prosperity from the people, and they have rampant fraud. So we're talking palace of politicians and all those other things. What do you think the response from the legislature should be, and how do you think that we can hold this administration accountable?
So we know what the response from the legislature should be because the Office of Legislative Auditor has flat out told us in their reports, this is what you should do. And those things have not been done. One of the most prominent examples of this, and I'm curious to see how you react to this one. Let's put it that way. They recommended that the legislature stop passing bills that say we're going to give X number of dollars to Y organization. So just hypothetical example, we're going to give $1 million to Happiness Fun Time Rainbows nonprofit, right? That's a bad practice. It's a bad idea to put in the law that the state is going to give this amount of money to this organization. Why? Because what if that organization, I don't know, just theoretically, decides that they're just going to give it to their friends and they're going to go out and have vacations and buy a house and send it to East Africa or wherever it is that it's going to go, right? What is the accountability mechanism within the law that you wrote? Zero. Because the law says you're going to give that money to those people. So stop doing that, the OLA told the legislature. They kept doing it. They told us that in early 2023, that report came out. Stop doing that, please. It's bad policy, bad management. And so what did the DFL do? They kept on doing it. Bill after bill after bill, coming through the Children and Families Committee on which I sit, coming through the Public Safety Committee on which I sit, saying, we're going to give this amount of money to these friends of ours over here with no accountability whatsoever. And when you ask, why, I think it ties into the answer I gave earlier, which is if your mentality is that we have a magic money tree and it's called the people who we take the money from, and there's no conceptual cap on how much you ought to spend or how much you ought to tax. What does it matter if you have $250 million of fraud? You meant well, and we can always go back to the magic money tree. It all cascades from worldview. If you don't have a basic underlying respect for the money that you're taxing and the people who produced it through the sweat of their brow, if you don't have an underlying respect for that, then it doesn't matter to you, which is why you don't make the changes. And again, they know what changes need to be made. They're just not making them. So that you say, what can we do? That question hits right up against the wall of where we can't talk. But something needs to be done. Somebody needs to be held accountable.
I think that segues into a great conversation about grassroots and what can be done in activism and things like that, of what you guys can do. My next question is, I know it's kind of being in a bad position in the Senate with that one seat majority, but we have seen some other really, really bad reports on education, right? So I would like to it's very confusing. It's very difficult for people to understand. We hear the DFL and the Walz administration say that we fully funded education, we fully funded that, we fully funded this, or we've given raises. And I'm confused of what I do read, even in the Star Tribune, right? So talk to me of, what does the relationship of government mandates have to do with schools closing or, government trying to play venture capitalism, for example? So, kind of one of the things that you see that went wrong when it comes to our children and our education.
So one of the things that I have been saying my entire time in the legislature and now as a member of the Senate Education Finance Committee is I am seeking to return meaning to the word independent in independent school district.
Yep.
Return meaning to that word. Exactly. Thank you. But why is that important? Because it is not all issues are equal in all communities. There are different concerns, different priorities in different communities, different challenges. And we are seeking, or at least there was at one time, an objective to recognize this truth and to empower people closer to the community within a locally elected board, school board, to make those decisions in response to the needs of the community to bring the best academic success to the students. Now, as a former educator, I taught college for 7 years. I can tell you, and it is my sincere belief, and I think the sincere belief of probably everybody in here, there is no greater mechanism, item, gift that we can give to our young people than empowering them with knowledge. And that comes with a well-rounded education. Now that's what should happen, and that can best happen when we empower and bring meaning back to independent school districts across the state, of which there is a little over 330 of them, school districts. Unfortunately, what's been happening is the question, there are those that they see the captive audiences of young people as a great opportunity to indoctrinate. So they have been loading up the mandates in the curriculum, the goals, with these objectives that are furthest from recognizing and incorporating the lessons of human history, to not repeat the errors of human history, but to maximize what works. And they're using the schools to indoctrinate, not to, again, create that well-rounded education.
That's right.
One of the things that they're doing is putting these mandates on, which is making education expensive. It's raising property taxes. It's further crushing the local communities that have to pay for it, such as St. Michael Albertville, STMA, one of the lowest per pupil funded in the state. And we need to change the way we look at the state and the relationship with the local school districts, how it's funded and the mandates put on there. Because again, we see, I think it was, I forget which organization it was, but there was a number of reports that have come out that Minnesota's academics are slipping, in whether it be reading at grade level, mathematics at grade level, graduation rates, they're continuing to slide. So there is no relationship between the amount of money that's spent and the academic success that results. So just giving more money isn't going to solve reading at grade level in and of itself. But yet that's the mentality. Throw more money at it, give billions of more dollars, and we see the result. In the last number of years, we are sliding further and further behind in the state of Minnesota. And who's going to suffer the most? Obviously the young people. And all of us in here know, as we've traveled down the road of life a little bit, once you get past those young years, once you turn 18 and you're in your 20s, it's not impossible, but it becomes much more difficult as life takes hold. And you get that car payment, that mortgage payment, you start having children. As life takes hold, it's much more challenging to go back and try to get that education that you were deprived of. Because some people with an ideology or an agenda at the state level were more important in pushing things than allowing for young people, while they were young, to maximize, again, those educational opportunities and academic excellence. And I see people in college, when I was a college teacher, trying to do that, but it's hard. It's hard when you have children and you have a family to go back to school to gain that education that people were deprived of when they were younger. And that's the travesty. As I'm watching these bills come through, as I'm listening to the testifiers, that it is just my heart breaks, is the best way I can put it. My heart breaks because as time goes on, the errors of what's happening, the brunt of it's going to be felt by the young people. And it's a significant challenge to try to make that up later in life.
Yeah, I feel like everything that has happened has gone directly against life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that starts with our kids, it starts with our children. And what is happening is making it so that it's impossible or hard to attain, which is why we need to reignite the American dream. It's on us. It's on us to do it with the community influence, with the legislative influence, with influence at your church or in your PTA, because these are the things that we need to reinstill in our children so that they have the American dream that we were told was possible, and we need to reignite that. Empowering people with bottom-up solutions, ensuring that they can achieve the greatest human potential possible. That hope is not lost. And I want to let everyone here know that, and I know that these gentlemen up here know that, and they fight for it every day, that achieving your greatest human potential is still possible, but it is certainly not done through education mandates. Thank you guys so much for answering those questions. I really appreciate it. We're going to go into our last segment, but first I want to thank Alpha News, who is streaming this online. We really appreciate them being able to provide this service and being able to show everyone that, you can go back and listen. I encourage you to share. Please go onto their website. Please go on to X, formerly known as Twitter, or YouTube. We, Americans for Prosperity Minnesota, will also be reposting those things. And make sure that this message is told. This empowerment message for people is told and is shared, because if it stays in this room, no one's going to hear about it.
Right.
So I encourage you, after this event, go and share and like and comment and bring this message to change that Overton window into our communities, because it starts with us. So next, we're going to have a short 20-minute Q&A. What we'll be doing is I'll kind of be running around. Rayanna is right here. She's going to be taking a cue. So I will be taking a first question. And we'll start here, and then I have you, Rayanna, if you can start there. Please remember to speak closely to the mic so our friends online can hear us properly.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for you two. I feel so proud of you, and it's so inspiring to see your courage and your bravery on those floors fighting our battles for us, so thank you for standing up. Secondly, reigniting the American dream comes down to, I believe, voter integrity and making sure our elections are protected. What can we do in November to make sure that our elections are safe and protected? And I feel like that's a huge issue as to maybe why we have a majority and how we take it over again.
So the nature of that question is one that's difficult to address in this format because we need to shy away from talking about elections and campaigning. There is a policy side to it, of course, because we had an election committee in both chambers, and We pass laws that influence elections. And so try to skirt that line as best I can. I will say that a lot of the changes that were made to election law in this term certainly didn't provide the sense of security that I think a lot of folks are asking for. And so we just need to continue to advocate on the issue side of what do secure elections look like, and then to continue to try to promote that through the influence that was spoken about earlier.
Hi. I want to talk to you about the social studies curriculum. That seems like it was just passed, and I might have dates and some of these things wrong. But it looks like I watched this unfold for 4 years, and the public was given ample time to talk about the garbage that was being included in this bill. How is it that we have 4 years, and it comes down to a vote, and then I think it was called Thinking Minnesota, where they outlined how and who wrote the final pages of this curriculum? How is it that common sense just was thrown out the door for this crappy garbage of education for social studies?
So again, I think that gets down to what I was saying earlier, in that most of us in this room, we subscribe to the philosophy of learning from history and teaching reality. And the path forward is a combination of avoiding the mistakes of the past and promoting the things that are known to more likely create success, with whatever success is defined as. But that's not their objective. We all in here have an objective, as I just described, or I suspect most of us have that. We share that objective. Avoiding the errors, promoting what's successful. As we look at human history, thousands of years of human history, multiple civilizations, multiple cultures, there are themes that develop that are bad and themes that develop that promote success. That's what we should be teaching. But that common objective is not what's shared by those that are drafting these curriculum objectives, as you're describing. They have a different philosophy, and it is not one based on free market economics. It is not one that is based on empowering individuals with information. It is not a philosophy that's based on a republic and maintaining a constitutional framework with limited powers and checks and balances. Instead, it's a philosophy of collectivism, Marxism, and all the other isms that you can think of that human history demonstrates don't lead to prosperity for people. Don't maximize individual liberty. I would suspect, if I were to ask for a show of hands, how many in here believe and prioritize maximizing individual liberty? Most hands, I suspect, would go up. But if you ask the other side, they don't subscribe to that philosophy, which is, it really is shocking. They fundamentally believe at their core that prosperity is achieved by growing government, by passing regulations and increasing taxes. Those who maybe have heard the commentator, Dennis Prager, phenomenal guy, very wise. It's a phrase that I've repeated from him many times. The larger the government, there's a relationship between individual and government. The larger the government, the smaller the individual.
That's right.
The larger the individual, the smaller the government. That's the philosophy I subscribe to. That's the philosophy I suspect most of you. But to the curriculum, they're baking into it the philosophy of growing government, which comes at the sacrifice of shrinking the role and the abilities of the individual. So what are we going to do about it? Would be the next part. Continue to get the truth out of what's happening and never giving up on our children. That's what we're going to do about it.
Good morning. Thank you both for everything you do. He's not wrong. Governor Walz isn't wrong. We're spending more than ever, but as you noted, it's coming with strings attached, like tampons in boys' rooms and not teaching absenteeism in health class. That's just illogical. So we're about to probably get flush with revenue. And there's probably a lot of debate on, and maybe some of it's already going on, where advanced spending, if you look at, we're spending more than ever. But all these dollars that they're saying, we increased education, came from mandates that are not impactful to that gift of education you stated. What is the discussion with the advancement of revenue coming out of some recently passed bills and how that money is going to be spent towards education? I think it's really time to figure out how to reallocate those dollars back to the independent school districts. We're putting it in there, god darn it. So what's that discussion on how we can make things more tangible to that education, primarily teachers' salaries? And I'll put that one to Lucero for education with his committee experience. And then Walter, if you wouldn't mind, because I know we've talked about infrastructure and other needs to protect our infrastructure. Same question, but maybe away from education for you.
So I'll try to be a little bit more succinct to get a little more questions in here with time. So massive amounts of dollars were being spent. But as I mentioned before, there is no direct relationship between dollars spent and academic outcome. Many of the dollars that were spent, billions of dollars, are never going to see the classroom. So what do we have to, so the reality is, while they speak about fully funding education and all this hogwash, the reality is many of those dollars will never see the classroom. In STMA, they continue to lay off teachers, or they have laid off many, many dozens of teachers and staff. And in some of the grade levels, they're approaching 40 students per teacher in the classroom. That's the reality, and that's unfortunate. Those dollars aren't reaching the classroom. The formula right now, the education funding formula, as most of you know, or maybe are aware or at least have some experience with, are engineered deliberately to funnel those dollars into the inner city. They're getting 3 and 4 times the amount of money per pupil that we are out here in rural parts of the state. Now, why is that happening? Cronyism, favoritism. It's a reward for electing certain groups of people, activists, and they reward by giving dollars, and they give all kinds of different names to it, whether it be nonprofits or others, but in this case, education funding, to groups, to the funding formula, which as it goes through the formula, it spits out the other side and is favoritism payback to those groups that continue to elect the radicals that are making harmful policy for the rest of the state. And so our students out here are being denied those opportunities for favoritism, cronyism, and payback. That's the reality, unfortunately. So the question is, what do we do about it? We have to get the truth out. People need to see that just because more dollars were spent, look at the facts. It's not subjective. It's not my opinion. Students continue to slip further behind in reading, in math, in graduation levels, even as billions of more dollars are spent. That alone, just the facts, objective, should demonstrate that throwing more money at it isn't going to solve the problem. The problem isn't money. It's flush with money. The problem is the system itself is fundamentally broken. The education system in Minnesota is fundamentally broken. It can no longer be tinkered. It has to be eliminated. We need to start over with a new funding formula, with a new way of deciding curriculum. And again, it needs to be heavily focused on empowering the local community who are closest to the students and the schools in those decisions that need to be made.
Yeah, all I'll add, because that was a pretty comprehensive response, is the analogy that I use is, let's say you're at your job and you're hankering for a raise. And you go to your boss, and eventually he says, yeah, sure, I'll give you a little extra something. And what he gives you is not an actual raise, but a bunch of gift cards to random stores around the community, many of which you don't shop at.
Right.
That's basically what the Democrats did to our school districts. They're crying for money. They're saying, give us more money, give us the ability to decrease class sizes, as an example. And the Democrats say, you know what, we'll give you historic funding, but you have to spend it on X, Y, and Z thing that isn't a priority to you and isn't a priority to your community and doesn't solve your underlying problem, such as school size, classroom size, and what have you. That's the issue. It's the lack of flexibility, the lack of fungibility to be able to take dollars and spend them where they're needed according to the judgment of those local folks, school board members who we elect. And there's much more to it, but in the interest of time, we'll move on. Thank you.
Sir, I see you in the front there. I have two people over here. I don't want to dominate everyone on one side, so I'll be there shortly.
Yes, I believe that a lot of it stems back to the blurring of definitions, and now we have NGOs that are absolutely overwhelming political atmosphere with donations that come through NGOs. Non-governmental organizations, there are some that are pretty good, like Americans for Prosperity, and there's others that are just as deleterious to the individual liberty out here. We have blurred definitions up and down the line. I remember Kathy and I went up to a meeting in St. Cloud one day, and somebody asked a question, why aren't these people that we're giving all this money to more grateful? And the first thing that came out of this social science person's mouth was, what does grateful look like?
What fuss?
Well, I didn't hear a question in there, but that, it's what I will say in terms of non-government agencies, there was a series of proposals. Imagine all of our government agencies. We have a Department of Transportation, Department of Education, we have the Secretary of State's office, there are other agencies and departments across the state, right? Traditionally, and the way that our republic is set up, is that those agencies, which are part of the executive branch, are to be funded by the legislature. Tax dollars come to the legislature makes decisions and appropriations, and then the executive branch, which has no money in and of itself other than that which the legislature gives it, is to then execute the law. There was a series of proposals that did pass and become law that allow for various agencies to receive funds outside of the legislature. Imagine the conflict of interest that is being created by allowing agencies of the executive branch to now receive funds from third parties that are not the legislature, and what that might result in. So anyway, when I'm thinking of non-government agency, yeah, that's what came to mind as I heard that. That shocks the conscience of many, and it should, because that's not the way to have a republic set up and be sustainable and accountable and transparent.
I will say when it comes to NGOs, if you are a good NGO like AFP, we don't accept government funding. So if you run it like a business and it's going well, then you deserve to maybe stay in business. But if you need taxpayer handouts to create mandates on people that you don't know, then maybe you shouldn't be an NGO. So.
Would you comment on pieces of policy legislation that were high priority for the majority but didn't pass, and which I assume are still high priorities? I'm thinking of things like sanctuary states, the ERA, the physicians-assisted suicide, some of the gun control legislation. Just give us your perspective on those pieces, because I assume they're still sitting out there, even though, thank God, they didn't pass.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, look, anything that they had the votes for, they passed. So the fact that those things did not pass tells you that they didn't have the votes for them. And most likely that was in the Senate because they had that one-member majority. So it only takes one person to say, I'm not doing this. And in some cases, you had senators explicitly saying, I'm not doing this. I think sanctuary state was one of those. I think a couple of the gun control provisions might have fit in that category as well. They have not given up and gone home. These ideas will be back to play if the current balance of power remains.
I had a couple comments to start off with. The wall of 34 senators that Eric spoke about, that it just became a wall of one person at the end. It was, a complete conflict of interest for someone accused or arrested for felony burglary to stand in the Senate. That vote, every vote that was taken by that person should have been null and void. With any conscience at all, she should have just stepped aside. And a threat to democracy. There is a threat to democracy. It's a threat to the Democrats' version of democracy, which is just one-party rule, just complete control of government. So, we do threaten their version of democracy, which really isn't the original meaning. And now we've got these uncontrolled voting stations at colleges. I mean, who's gonna monitor that? Who's gonna stand there and say, "Yeah, let me see your ID or let me see your registration"? Is that just going to be another one of these bring in as many Dropbox votes that we want and get those counted? And then afterwards, try and straighten it all out. I mean, it's got to be straightened out beforehand, in my opinion. And then I had a question about education. What's the incentive for teachers to pass students that aren't reaching the attainable goal or the non? Why are they passing students that are failing?
Well, there's way more than I can answer in 30 seconds, but let me just say this. Teachers in the classroom are underappreciated. They have the hardest job. Number one, they have one of the most important jobs in our society, and that is to influence and educate the next generation, and do so in a positive and constructive manner. At the same time, these policies that are being passed from the state level are making it incredibly difficult, not only with the low salary, but I have spoken to a number of educators in the classroom who are afraid. They are being hurt because of the lack of disciplinary abilities that the state is taking away under the auspices of racism or other things. They are making the classroom dangerous. So what is the incentive? Again, it's a longer answer than I could give right now, but just know this. My hat's off. I know we both and many in the legislature deeply appreciate the hard work that our teachers are doing. And we are not making it easier. When I say we, the legislature, this radical policy that's being passed and pushed down to our local school districts is not only not making it easier, it's making it incredibly difficult and life safety threatening in some cases to do their job and to positively influence and educate the next generation. It is so frustrating, these stories that I'm hearing. So frustrating.
Thank you. Also, there's only about 10 more minutes, so if we can keep just to one question so that we can try to get through as many people as possible. I believe it was you and then you, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks for showing up, guys. Senator, I got a question for you. I think you touched on it briefly. Is anything being done to eliminate equity in funding? That is nothing but a slush fund. We need to get back to a biannual budget submitted by superintendents to the state. Wipe that equity in funding out, because every 2 years, all the citizens at least here in this school district get hit with levy requests. And if anything's driving up property taxes right now, it's these levies. Thank you.
So that's the other byproduct. It's an undercurrent right now that people are feeling, but they may not understand the whole reasoning behind. As property values have skyrocketed, those that are homeowners, and even if you're a renter, the value of that apartment or housing unit has gone up, the property tax has gone up. Moreover, you may have seen some of the headlines. It may not apply to as much out here as it does in the city and first-ring suburbs. The value of office buildings is going down. So as the value of office buildings goes down, the property tax categorization is commercial. So commercial industrial has a higher tax rate and pays exorbitantly more taxes than a residential property does. So as the values of commercial industrial go down, and as local government continues to spend money, because local property tax is paid by commercial industrial and residential, as the government spends, but the value of commercial industrial goes down, the tax burden that CI, commercial industrial, was once paying is now shifted over to residential. So as the value of residential has increased in your property tax value, that tax burden from CI has shifted over, and it is crushing the back. So even if you're renting, that apartment complex or unit has gone up in value, the property tax has gone up in value, or has gone up, and the cost is then passed on to the tenant. And so it is crushing the backs of local school districts like STMA, who is, the taxpayers in our area are being crushed. I already mentioned that story of the Otsego resident and the Hanover resident. We're being crushed. There's no more money to spend. So to your point, I did touch on the funding formula. It's complicated, but in 15 seconds, there's a base that every student, regardless of the area of state they're in, gets. It starts with a base, and then there's a series of buckets, which are called categoricals. And if you have X percentage that are English as a second language student, X percentage that are, pick all these different categoricals. There's different categories. Many of the categories and many of the school districts across the state don't fit. They don't meet those criteria, and therefore they don't get the extra dollars. So they get just the base, if that makes sense. Whereas Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the targeted allies of the majority, the Democrat majority, those do meet these criteria of these categoricals, so they do get the extra dollars, and because of the base plus the categoricals equals the total is met in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that is the reason why they're getting 3 and 4 times the amount of money per student than we are out here. So I think your question was what's being done about it. I've offered many bills. I've had many amendments. I've had bills that were refused to be given a bill hearing in committee by the chair, that I then took that bill, converted it to an amendment. In fact, we were the chief authors of a handful of bills in each body. I took that bill because of the refusal by the radical chair to even give it a bill hearing, converted it to an amendment, offered the amendment on the floor. It actually gained enough votes. I think I had 2 or 3 Democrats vote for it because it's not a partisan issue. It would help funding in their communities as well. They voted for it. It was voted on, but then what? This radical chair who sat on the conference committee, stripped that amendment. Even though it gained enough votes on the floor, she stripped it in conference committee so it didn't see the light of day. Wow. That's what we're up against in terms of the funding formula, and that's why I say we can no longer tinker on the edges. The formula needs to be eliminated, and we need to start over and reinvent the way that we fund equitably in the state of Minnesota for the benefit, not of cronyism, but for the benefit of our students. That's why we'll keep this fight up.
So I have seen a very dramatic shift within one particular school district up here. We've lived in Albertville for 2 years, used to live in Monticello. We are actually pulling all of our kids out of Monticello to go to STMA just from seeing the great shift. And I got a question, because is there a policy or something that tells these school districts, if you start to, lean towards the left, we'll throw you a bone and give you some extra pocket money? Because for me, It's crazy the dramatic shift within the past 4-5 years. I have to say, since 2019, 2020, and Monticello is getting a bunch of grants and seeing the shift in, let's talk about racism and talk about so-and-so 1619 project. I really just want to know, is there a specific policy that was passed that said, hey, you go with our agenda and we'll throw you a bone?
I don't know that there's a specific policy that accomplishes that. I do know that there's a lot of grant money out there in order to affect the woke agenda, for lack of a better term. What I will say, to tack on to what Senator Lucero just said regarding his ordeal of trying to help out school districts like STMA in the per pupil funding in the Senate, I will qualify this by saying this is both anecdotal and alleged, so take it with a grain of salt. But that exact same chair that he's talking about, who pulled the policy out in conference committee after it passed off the floor, told a group of parents from STMA, part of the legislative action team, that they could perhaps get their funding issue addressed if they, quote, elected better representatives, unquote. Okay? So they're not even hiding it. It is 100% about politics. That's all it is. The word the senator used earlier was cronyism. That's the word. Now, what I will say is that, why are we seeing this divergence of here's the community's values and here's what the school's doing, right? Why are we seeing that in Monticello? Why are we seeing that in Elk River? Part of the reason is because of the way that school boards are structured, the fact that it is not independent. And you have a lot of these school districts who have adopted model policy that comes out of the Minnesota School Board Association, which effectively transforms the school board from a democratic representative body that is accountable to you, the voter, you, the people, the taxpayer, the resident, the parent, into a show trial, into an oligarchy where the person who's in charge is the superintendent, and that's all you need. So all you need to do is get the right superintendent in there who is going to drag the school board along by their teeth, by their nose, and persecute, push down, oppress any dissent from teachers, staff, parents, community members. And there are stories of people whose personal lives have been attacked as a consequence for pushing back against the agenda in these school districts. That's what's going on. If you listen long enough, they'll tell you through their accusations of others what it is that they're doing. When they talk about structural problems, structural power structures, that's because they're doing it.
Yep.
Right?
That's right.
They have implemented that. That's how you gain the leverage to be able to take the policy of a school district that is supposed to serve the community in which it resides to diverge so greatly from the values that are actually lived out in that community and sincerely held by the folks who pay the bills.
How long have they been chairs? How long have they been chairs?
So I think this gentleman up here had a question, but the question was, how long have they been chairs? Well, the chairmanship changes continuously with each new session. So the chair right now, the majority flipped. So the current chair of the Senate Education Committee has been a chair for 2 years. When I was in the House, the chair, now a former representative, Jim Davney, Minneapolis Democrat, he had been chair when the majority. So in my first 2 terms I served in the House, I was in the majority. When the Democrats took over in the House, he became the chair. So he was then chair for the 4 years, the second half of my time in the House, so for 4 years then. But the question, how long have they been chairs, it's constantly changing with each new legislative cycle, depending on who wins elections, depending on who's in the majority, depending on who retires, et cetera, et cetera.
we need to go back to family-based values. We need to get rid of the criminal fraud that's going on in the state and the counties, the school systems. And I think it'll change a lot of the values and bring it back to a family-based value.
I have time for 2 more questions. This gentleman here, and one. You didn't? Okay. And then maybe we'll just close out because we're running up on time. About 4 minutes left.
So I think sometimes the problem we have is we don't get in front of things. The first question back there was how after 4 years do we not have any common sense in the social studies? And something that has just recently passed is the health standards are no longer going to be local at the independent school district level. They are going to be done by the state. You can imagine what might come through health standards done by the state. So now's the time. What do we do on the front end? Because 4 years later, we're going to end up in the same spot where something we don't want is voted through, and so what can we do with it? So what do we do on the front end to get the kind of standard? Keep them at the local level would be even better, but it's passed. So assuming it moves forward, what do we do on the front end to get good standards?
So I'm going to answer the question more broadly. People are feeling pain, financially and other non-financial areas of their lives, whether it be their work, whether it be organizations they're involved to, whether it be their children. People are not happy. And in this pain that people are feeling, whether it be the outcomes of education, whether it be the amount they're paying for their child care, whether it be for the groceries, etc., what we need to do, how we change the outcome, again, answering more broadly, is the pain exists, we're feeling it. We need to connect the dots of the policy, the governance, the mandates, the lack of accountability, lack of transparency that is resulting in the conditions that are creating the pain. So does that make sense? What we need to do to get out in front of it is connect the dots with the pain that people are feeling and the policy and the priorities of those who are pushing that are resulting in that pain. That is how we influence taking back and correcting the ship in terms of fiscal and policy in this state. And the number one objective for the two of us, for I suspect most in this room, and I would say the vast majority of Minnesota, is to allow people to make decisions rather than having government make the decisions for them. And I'm speaking broadly in all areas, whether it be education, whether it be health standards, whatever it is. Parents and people do not want government pushing objectionable material to their children. People do not want to be pushed into areas of their life. They do not want to be pushed out of their house due to taxes. Right. They do not want to be pushed out of the state due to the cost. People don't want these things, yet these are the things that are happening because of this. So we need to get out in front of it by connecting the dots, and within our spheres of influence, our friends, family, our network, our colleagues, letting them know who is responsible for the pain that they're feeling.
Yeah, I'll do the same thing and use that as a jumping off point to just kind of give wrap up concluding comments. This really comes down to character. It comes down to the character of the people who we send to represent us. It comes down to the character of the people who are hired and appointed to do these jobs on the ground. And it comes down to our character as citizens who are engaged in the process. And I'll tell you very specifically where I think that self-examination needs to start. We have to reject apathy, cynicism, fatalism, the idea that there's nothing we can do, the idea that this is all baked into the cake, accepting corruption. These stories that have come out in recent weeks of hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud that just nobody's accountable for in the state. Nobody gets fired. Nobody even gets like a verbal reprimand or a note in their personnel file for allowing it to happen. We see these stories, and the worst part of it is when we shrug our shoulders and we go, well, what are you going to do? That's government. That's how it works. No, we need to uphold a higher standard. We need to demand better.
That's right.
And we need to hold people to account for what they profess to believe. Going back to my opening comments, you say you're concerned about threats to democracy, and then you do this? You say you're concerned about threats to democracy, and then you rig policies in our school districts so that we can't even affect curriculum and outcomes and service through our political representation of school board members? Who's the real threat to democracy here? Every single time Democrats are given the opportunity to enable you to live your life according to your values, they take it away and they create a department, or they assign a czar. They hire a few bureaucrats. Where did all that money go? Historic funding for education? It's going to nonprofits. It's going to bureaucracy. We got a new State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. They created a new State Department. It's about putting people in charge of you. And so the question that we have to consider is, are we okay with that?
No. No, no.
Then you got to take charge. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both so much. I really hope that this was not only informative, but galvanizes you to do something. Both of these incredible gentlemen who fight and who come out here and who want to make a difference, they cannot do it alone. I mean, we have seen that sometimes you can move on things, right? AFP worked on an energy bill. We actually got a hearing. It didn't pass because of the DFL majority. But why did we get a hearing? Well, because we got 10,000 people to send emails to those legislators. We would not have been able to do that without action. We need action. We can't let it slide. Too many times in history, they ignored it. They let it slide. And we cannot do that here. So as an organization, what we see is policy majorities. What can a policy majority do? We've seen what they can do. So I would encourage you to not only support policy champions like Representative Walter Hudson and Senator Eric Lucero, but help get connected with them so that they can also help other policy champions. We don't need people there to just be elected to be a body. We need people there to fight. We need people there to stand on principle, to reignite the American dream, to believe that prosperity is possible. So I really appreciate you guys so much. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Alpha News for streaming this event. Please stick around. And I don't know how long these gentlemen are staying, but if you would like to ask them a question that we weren't able to get to you, please do so. We're going to be tearing down here. But if you would also like to get to know more about what we can help you, equip you with, please see one of our staffers at the table. They can help you get involved as well. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
America was built on the idea that anything is possible with hard work and a dream. But it doesn't feel like that today. Our country is drowning in debt. Political division is intensifying, and the American dream is slipping away. President Biden's out-of-touch progressive agenda has only made things worse. Americans can't afford another 4 years of this. That's why Americans for Prosperity is committed to changing the trajectory of our country. Our unparalleled grassroots network is launching the largest effort we've ever undertaken. Together, we can win and restore America's promise with proven principled solutions. It's time to reignite the American dream.